After graduating from the Eastman School of Music, um, John entered the Air Force Band in Washington and played with them from January of 1963 to October of 1966 under George Howard and Arnold Gabriel. John Pursell was in the Air Force Band program from 1984 until 2003. From 1984 until 1987, he played in the McGuire Air Force Band under Bruce Gilks. Am I pronouncing that correctly, Gilks? And then from 1987 to 2003 with the U.S. Air Force Band in Washington, but specifically the ceremonial band that played for funerals in places like Arlington National Cemetery. He played under James Bankhead, Alan Bonner, Lowell Graham, and very briefly Dennis Leyendecker. So I welcome both of you. John Landis, I'd like to start by giving us a summary of Colonel George Howard and the liquor scandal.
Yeah, well, it was quite a shock for me to leave the Eastman School of Music, where I played in the wind ensemble under Frederick Fennell, and I'm on 12 of Fennell's recordings. I really wanted to be an opera conductor, and when we all graduated from Eastman, myself and 14 of my buddies, we all had to deal with the government draft. We didn't have very many soldiers in Vietnam at that time, but it was a good idea that we all auditioned for the 4 bands in Washington, West Point, or the Coast Guard band in Connecticut. It's a good thing we all got positions, because in the next 4 years, we had the Vietnam War, and any papers that we had saying that we were going to go to the band would have been thrown out. In fact, when I was in basic training, the second week, October 62, guess what? That was the Cuban Missile Crisis, where we almost went to war with Russia. And we were all hauled into the auditorium in Texas and told that regardless of what kind of papers we had promising us a position in a band, would be thrown out and we'd all be going to war. Well, that was scary enough. Okay, then came 1963. I went to Washington, got in the Air Force Band, did my first tour in the fall of '63, and we were driving back from our tour in the South up some highway in Virginia when we stopped for lunch. We went in for lunch and the TV was on showing President Kennedy's assassination. So November 1963, so then I marched in Kennedy's funeral. So whenever they show the footage, no, we don't see the Air Force Band in the photos, because they always show the Navy band, because Kennedy had been in the Navy. But we were right behind the Navy band. So anyway, I did that. But anyway, in 1964, we finally got Arnold Gabriel as the conductor. How did we get Arnold Gabriel and why? Well, the conductor of the Air Force Band had been Colonel George S. Howard, who started during World War II when there even wasn't an Air Force yet. It was called the Army Air Forces. And Colonel Howard was only the second conductor of that band. But he was still there many, many years later, and about half the band members, when I got there, had all been in World War II. It was a very senior citizens type band, and here I was, a 21-year-old coming from Eastman and Fred Fennell. I have to say this, I'm sorry. I try to be as nice as I can, but Colonel George S. Howard was the worst conductor I have ever played under in my life. And I've played under 150 conductors, and I'm a conductor myself. This guy was totally, I can't even describe how bad he was. To start a piece, he would just put his arms out like this, and the first clarinet would indicate the tempo. Every piece. And I don't know how he figured out how to end, but after my first or second rehearsal, I went up to the music stand after he left the room and looked on his stand, and there was some manuscript there, one line of the melody of every piece that we played. He made the librarian staff write out a cue sheet for every piece. So those poor guys, Floyd Worley and all the staff, they had to do this. This is how the guy got along. Well, it turns out that this is the closest that any musical organization I've ever heard being threatened by the Pentagon to be annihilated. Now this happened in early 1964. I went to rehearsal into the band room, and I got in there, and the whole band program, the string players were there, the singing sergeant's chorus, the dance band, the ceremonial band, we were all brought into the band room, and a general from the Pentagon wearing his uniform came in and stood up on the podium and said, "If I had my way, I would have you all fired and imprisoned, and I would have this building torn down." He says, "But I can't do that because the damn Congress tells me that they authorize the musical units and nothing can be done about doing anything about it without the Congress doing something. So I'm stuck with this. But they said, I can kick a lot of you out." And I'm saying, what the hell is going on here? What is this? And I didn't know. And so he said, well, we're going to start with you old guys in the band. If you're near retirement, we're gonna have individual interviews with all of you, and we're gonna persuade you to retire, but we'll give you an honorable discharge and you'll get all your benefits. But we want you out of here. Holy cow. Then, after he did that, so go out the room because we got guys that are gonna interview. Now we're talking to you young guys who are in your first tour. I'd been there a year. Oh shit, you know, because I really liked Washington, and wanting to be an opera conductor, I'd found out that they had a wonderful opera company in Arlington, which I ended up being an assistant conductor, and I played in 8 operas during my 4 years, and also there were 2 operetta companies in Washington, one of them in Montgomery, Maryland, that did 2 Gilbert and Sullivan operettas each year, and another group that met in the summer that did 1 production of Gilbert and Sullivan over the summer. I conducted all of those for my 4 years there. I wanted to stay there. I didn't have a job, you know. So when I went into the interview, they said, well, we'll give you an honorable discharge saying you will fulfill your duty. And I said, do I have to do this? And they said, no, you really want to stay here? And I said, yes. So I did. So what was this that caused this near annihilation? Well, it turns out that Colonel Howard had 2 financial schemes going on. One involved the number of players that we took on tour. He only took half the band on tour and half of the chorus. But he told the Pentagon that the whole group was going on tour, so that they booked, you know, hotel reservations and buses as if it were the full organization. Well, he and the guy that booked the tours pocketed the extra money.
Oh, shoot.
So that was scheme number 1. That had been going on for years. That was the travel scheme. But then there was another one. The string group was very famous because it had about 30 string players and a harpist. And they would go to places like Barbados, the Virgin Islands, anywhere in the Air Force world, and play dinners at the officers' club where people sat at tables. They would walk around playing Strauss waltzes, etc. Oh, the people love, because, you know, if you're living way down in Barbados, you know, what else do you have to do? So they would fly the strolling strings to all over the world to do these programs. Well, it turned out that two members, elderly members of that group that had been around for a while, Colonel Howard would give them a lot of money to take with them to those places, and they would go into the PX, which is the Walmart of the military. They had a big grocery store at each of these places. Well, they would go into there and they would buy bottles of expensive booze and until their money ran out, and they would bring this booze back to Washington. Now, how did they do that? Well, there were always two airplanes taking strolling strings to these gigs. One had the musicians, the others had all the instrument cases. So what did these guys do? They put an extra string bass case and an extra harp case that were empty. They would load the booze onto the plane, fly, and of course the planes would come back to Andrews Air Force Base, and there was no questions asked. They would just put the stuff in the truck and it would go to the Bowling Air Force Base, and then the booze would be transferred to Colonel Howard's car, where he would drive it to his home. And then every time he had to go to the Pentagon to talk about his being, whatever, to his annual review or whatever, he would take the bottles of booze and give them to various generals at the Pentagon to make sure that he kept his job. Now, I don't know how long this went on, and Harry Gleason told me all the details, but he never told me how long this had been going on. How did it come to an end? Well, a young violinist joined the Strolling Strings. He was, I don't know what his name, I don't remember his name. He was very young, 21, with red hair and freckles, played the violin. He saw what was going on somehow on one of the first trips that he played with the Strolling Strings. When they got back to Washington, he called somebody on the phone and said, "I have something to report." The next time they went to Barbados, when the plane landed at Andrews, there were armed guards all around the plane. And they interrogated everybody there for hours. And finally the two guys that were running the scam said, "Well, hey, this is our colonel told us to do this." So of course, when we had that big meeting in the band room, Colonel Howard wasn't there. He had already been relieved of his duty. And of course, Howard had the audacity to write a book about his life. I forget the name of it.
Symphony in the Sky.
Symphony in the Sky. It's a piece of crap book full of nothing but bullshit. Unbelievable. The funniest story about Colonel Howard and his incompetence was right after the end of World War II, when we were rebuilding our relationships with Europe. The Air Force Band went on I don't know if it was still the Army Air Force. No, I think once it was the Air Force. It was the Air Force, right. 47 or 48. 47. They traveled to Germany in a kind of like friendship type thing, and the band was going to play in some big stadium, and they decided to fly Colonel Howard in on a helicopter, and it landed, and Howard got out and marched up onto the podium to lead the Ride of the Valkyries of Wagner, which he conducted in 4. And of course, the Ride of the Valkyries, well, the band never looked at him anyway. But that, of course, is not in the book by Colonel Howard. But anyway, he was, I don't know if he was a nice man or not. I didn't really get to know him that much. They let him conduct the police band in DC though, right after he left the Air Force, and he hired several of us players to come and play in the police band. I played 2 concerts with him, but I think he eventually retired to San Antonio. But anyway, this booze thing, and I think they found the booze thing first, then uncovered the other scandal afterwards, meant that we were devastated because all of the senior people were out. And the two very good, the choral person was Bob Landis, a terrific, he was an opera conductor too, and later had an opera company in Florida. He was let go, and it was just a total shakeup. The band was half size, and we lost 2 trumpet players, and they lost 1 oboe, and it was just terrible. So when they hired Arnold Gabriel to come in, Gabriel had just gotten the job at the Air Force Academy in Colorado. He was living out of suitcases because he'd been in Germany before that. So he was moving his family into Colorado, and they said, no, you got to go to Washington. So Gabriel arrived sometime like March '64. I was there the first day they brought him in. And he said, look, and he told us when he arrived, he said, I took this job, but they told me, you got to take this organization the way it is. And Gabriel says, I can't run a program here with half the people, and I was told there were these number of people. And so he said, unless you let me have auditions, I'm not going to take the job. Well, within the next couple months, we had daily auditions going on all the time. And we finally got back to almost the number that we were, but when I left in '66, it still wasn't as big as it had been when I first got in there. But I must say that Gabriel, my 2 favorite band conductors are Fred Fennell and Arnold Gabriel. I've played under many other good ones, Russ Mickelson and the guy from Reynolds. And I went to Interlochen too, and we had plenty of guest conductors. But Gabriel was sensational and great gentleman. And I've been living in Buffalo for 50 years, and every time he comes to Buffalo, I always get together and see him. We had a big luncheon for him in 2011. And many of the people at the luncheon were people that had played in Gabriel's very first Air Force band, which was the Sampson Air Base south of Rochester. That was his first gig as a military conductor in 1947. And a lot of those players ended up in the Buffalo Philharmonic. I was in that, and I got to know these people. And of course, they were close to Rochester, so they worked it out with Eastman to let all the people in the Sampson band go to Eastman and get their degrees. So that was a really great deal. So we had a big luncheon for Gabriel in 2011. My wife was there, we were all there. And Gabriel's right across from me at the table. And he looked at me, he said, John, you're the only trumpet player from the Air Force band of my first years that's still alive. Thanks, Gabe. Yeah, I'm the fossil, I'm 84, so what the heck. I don't play my trumpet very much anymore. Last year, my wife and I played in a musical. It's a musical that makes fun of William Shakespeare. It's called Something Rotten.
Oh,
if you've ever seen, that's a fabulous musical. But shit, the trumpet book is good. God, you got piccolo trumpet, flugelhorn. It's all. Well, I practiced for 3 months to get my chops back up, and every year we played. My wife plays trombone, and she couldn't be here this time because she's playing another music. She's playing Something Rotten this weekend, actually. So we met in a brass quintet, and the brass quintet plays the UB graduation every May. So I would get out my trumpet each year and get enough to play second trumpet in Pomp and Circumstance. But after playing Something Rotten, I said, no, I don't think so.
Actually, piccolo means something different. You just play it down an octave.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I did with most of it. But I still play piano, and I still conduct when asked to do so. I've got to rehearse with a clarinetist when I get back. But we just moved to New York State because she got the job in the Glens Falls Symphony. And then, so anyway, my experience in the Air Force was very nice once we got rid of Colonel Howard. And so anyway, the musical unit that was almost annihilated, it's still there. Oh, but they did annihilate all the buildings that were on Bowling Air Base that I played in, because you went into the base.
World War I?
Yeah, the ones from the Second World War,
Yes.
where you go down past the
finally
guard,
got rid
then you
of
go left.
Mhm.
Those are all gone now because they have a whole new group of buildings,
Get all
right?
the building. Yeah, those buildings had actually been condemned
Yeah,
But we were still in it, we were still working
Yeah.
on them, but they'd been condemned.
Yeah.
Because the bathrooms, the hot water had stopped working, and apparently that's one of the reasons for condemning the building or whatever.
well,
yeah,
and,
they're
and I'm,
terrible.
I'm very happy to say that a very good friend of mine in Buffalo, who's a terrific percussionist, his son just got into the Airmen of Note. He is the keyboard player now for the Airmen of Note. And he's a terrific keyboard player. And so he brought me pictures of the new building when he came home to visit his dad.
It's former commissary.
The former commissary, yeah.
Commissary.
Okay, well, listen, that's all I have to
No,
say.
that's fine, John.
Is that enough?
That's great, marvelous.
John, it's a pleasure to
Yes.
see. Yeah, John came in long after I left, and even after Yuri. Yari was even gone by the time you got.
No,
there.
Yari
he
came
was,
after.
Yari was
Yari
there.
Villanueva.
I was actually Yari's supervisor for 5 years.
Yeah.
So this-
Wow,
See?
that's something.
So anyway, that's,
John, did you play for any notable funerals? I mean, famous people?
Yeah, there were some, probably the most famous was Jimmy Doolittle.
yeah.
Oh, Jimmy Doolittle.
Yeah, but that was a big hoop-de-doo, as we always say. It was, cast of thousands. It's funny, I was asked one time about, memorable jobs. And I always said that there were so many you really couldn't remind of, but you were reminded of the ones when something funny happened. And that's what you remember. And I was at Arlington Cemetery, well, the one day, when we go to Arlington as buglers, all you get is a name and a grave location and a time, and you go, and okay. So my guy that I'm burying that day, he was a master sergeant, which means he didn't get the whole procession. He just got what's called a simple honors at the graveside. So I go out and find the grave. Okay, I'm warming up my car, and I notice they've got a space roped off with the velvet rope, and they always would do that for media. I mean, why does this guy have media coming to his funeral? It seemed a little odd. Okay, see the funeral procession coming, and I see these limos. Out steps the Secretary of the Air Force. Out steps the Chief of Staff of the Air Force.
Ooh.
This guy's a master sergeant. I'm like, who is this guy? Well, this was during Desert Shield, what had happened before Desert Storm. He was the first person killed in Desert Shield. He was run over by a forklift. I'm sorry, but you shouldn't, I guess we shouldn't laugh. He's just as dead to his family, But it's just kind of like, run over by a forklift. How do you do? So, but he got the same 24 notes that everybody else gets. But it's funny, when you were saying about, there's actually some good came out of the Colonel Howard thing. When I was in, the idea they were being so scrupulously honest that they used to say that the Air Force would spend $1,000 to avoid the impression of misspending $100.
Yeah.
That they would do it because they wanted to be so above board. And I mean, when you got to like security clearances and stuff, it was just like reams of paper after reams of paper that you had to fill out and go. And they investigated you all the way back to And we would ask auditionees, we'd say, is there anything in your background that might keep you from getting a security clearance? Because we have to know. Well, one time we had a tuba player. Oh, no, nothing in my background. I'm fine. He forgot about that restraining order that his wife had put on him because he tried to kill her.
Oh.
That was the end of him. He didn't make it either. So.
Would have been okay if he was a trombone player.
Well, yeah. They don't know any better, But it's a. People ask about, do I recommend it as a career? Absolutely. Military bands, you're playing your horn, you're getting paid pretty darn well to do it. You're playing with top-notch people, and you're serving your country. And it's like, hey, so I did 21 and a half years.
Well, I left after 4 years because I can't even tell you how low the salary was in the early 60s.
I know.
It was terrible.
Barely above World War II wages.
That's right. And I went to grad school after I went to University of Michigan and had my career in opera touring and ended up with the Buffalo Philharmonic because I had to make a living and there just wasn't enough money. But now what they're paying those people to go in those bands, and of course the fact they can have women too. I mean, it's fair. Everything is it's so much better.
And the auditions, it's funny, they will always advertise the jobs and then they'll invite certain people. The dirty secret is you can't really deny someone an audition because it's a government job.
Yeah,
If they wanna come and they wanna be heard, you have to accommodate them. But what we would do, when we'd have all the, and of course, I'm going back now 20-some years, when they still had tape. We would get all our tapes from everybody, we'd listen to them all, and then we'd pick the 15 or 20 we wanted to hear. Then we'd actually get on the phone and call the others. And we'd say, look, if you wanna come, play for an audition, fine and dandy, but you wanna know that we've got, 20 recordings we think are stronger than yours. We never said better, we said stronger. And before you buy a ticket to fly from Oregon or something to DC. And 99% of the time they would say, thanks, I'll pass. Until one time, the trumpet opening, I called this kid, he lived in Pittsburgh, his name was Pat McDermott. And he says, I wasn't happy with that recording. I can do better. I think I'm gonna come anyway. It's only a 4-hour drive. I said, come on down. Guess who wins the job?
yeah,
By the second round, it was already obvious to any of us that this kid was gonna win, because he was just head and shoulders. He's still there. He's over his 20 now, but he's still
That's
there.
great.
Yeah.
That's great,
And
yeah.
so, I would tell people that if you really think you can do it, we'll listen to you. It only matters what happens in the audition room. Nothing else matters. I mentioned that with Yari. When he auditioned for us the first 2 times, we didn't take him. He'd been out playing gigs the night before and his lips were shot.
yeah.
And some of us knew him. We'd worked with him. We knew he could play, but we
Yeah.
couldn't. We couldn't do it. And then finally the 3rd time, we said, "Don't go out and gig the night before, Yari. Just come in for us." Then he made it.
Does anyone know whether Gabriel is still alive?
Yeah,
Oh,
Yes.
he had a little bit of a scandal with his background.
Well, in fact, I was supposed to come here and talk about Gabriel a couple of years ago, and I declined to do it because the book came out, and I called Yari, and I said, Yari, what's going on? He says, oh, I know the whole story about this. Get back to me, and he never got back to me.
Well, he was-
So I said, well, I can't go do a talk here about Gabriel's book, which has written by his son, which has misinformation if I don't know the real thing. So that's why I declined
Right.
to do that.
Well, they used to
And-
say that he'd been on D-Day at Normandy.
Yeah.
Now, he was a machine gunner. We know that.
Yeah, but he didn't go on
It was
the,
like 12 days later.
he didn't go on the assault across the English
And he
Channel.
finally admitted that. He said, well, yeah, they made that mistake, and I just never got around to correcting it.
Yeah, well, Yari was gonna call me and tell me that, and he never has, so. So pox on you, Yari.
But they,
Anyway, it's sorry to talk so long,
But with
folks.
the,
We wanna go eat, that's right. Yeah.
I always
No,
tell
we have
people,
time. We're fine.
We're fine? Okay.
After
We have
Colonel
15
Gabriel,
more minutes. Yeah.
after Colonel Gabriel, of course, we had Mike Bankhead, and Colonel Bankhead was discharged for sexual harassment. The story, well, not story, this is what happened, I was there. He actually conducted an 11 o'clock rehearsal from 9:30 to 11, went to his office at 11, and there were men from Special Affairs waiting outside for him, and by 1 o'clock in the afternoon, he was retired.
Boy.
And
And
then
I
the next
often wondered-
conductor was also.
Well, I often wondered about him going home that day to his wife. Hi, honey, how are you? Well, I retired.
And then the next conductor
And
also
then the
had
next conductor comes
sexual
in,
stuff
he
too.
gets thrown out for sexual harassment.
Yeah,
And I said, he should be thrown out for sheer stupidity. If your predecessor has been
Yeah.
thrown out for sexual harassment,
Yeah.
you might want to consider that this is something they're going to look at, But then we had a number of people in interim before Colonel Graham got there. One of which was an interesting man. His name was Keith Lance. He was not a musician. He was in the admin section. He's a full bird colonel and knew nothing about music. But they sent him over to run the organization. And he did a darn good job. The junior officers then, one conducted the concert band, one conducted the singers, that kind of thing. And Keith Lance kept everything running according to the way the Air Force wanted it to run.
Yeah.
And most of us thought Colonel Lance did a pretty good job. We had
Yeah.
no problem with him at all. And then, of course, Colonel Graham came in for his 7 years, and I left.
yeah,
not
that's,
long after
the
Colonel
thing
Graham.
is, they don't allow the conductors to stay for a long time now.
7 years.
Gabriel was there for 22 years, but now it's only a 7-year
7 years.
thing, and then you're out, because they figure it's your last job.
Yeah, that's what they consider your
But
your
Gabriel
terminal
was
position.
fairly young when he went there, so, yeah.
Graham was the first one that left at 7,
That
and now
left, yeah.
Leyendecker was
Mhm.
gone too, and I don't even know who conducts it to this day. So
Yeah.
Question, most of the recordings that you hear by the Air Force Band are conducted by Lowell Graham.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Was he more of a proponent of recording, or why did that happen?
Yeah, he would. Colonel Graham was an interesting man. I liked Colonel Graham. We got along with him in the ceremonial brass because he basically left us alone. We're out at Arlington playing cemetery funerals. That's it, you know. But he came in, and the band was kind of used to doing a 2-hour rehearsal in the morning, and then after lunch, they'd all leave to go to their teaching gigs or whatever. And Colonel Graham said, no, you're paid for 8 hours. We're gonna rehearse in the afternoon too. And he wanted the Air Force band to be the best band the world had ever heard. That was his goal, you might say. And I've heard a lot of bands, and maybe I'm a little biased, but at least for technical proficiency, that's the best band I've ever heard when he was conducting it. And he was, you know, he was a big proponent. He liked to record at least twice a year, once in the fall, once in the spring. And they put it, and not always a concert band, sometimes a jazz band would record, the Airman and Note would do. And he was a proponent of building the library. He once said, he said, after we're all gone, there's only one thing left, the library. You know, so he was a big proponent.
And he knew the people that ran Telarc Record Company too.
Yeah, he knew that.
He knew in Cleveland, so he made a lot of good records.
And we
there's
went
that PDQ Bach, the works of PDQ Bach played by band. It's a hysterical album. It's just terrific.
Colonel Graham's retired down in
Yeah.
El Paso.
Right. No, he's very good.
Yeah, he's so it's
Yeah.
like the song, you know, the old saying, "What a long, strange journey it's been," you know. But and I went into this I was older. I was 28 when I went, which is a good thing because if I'd gone in right out of college, I was way too cocky. I don't think I would have done very well. You know, I needed to be kicked around Philadelphia for a while as a freelancer.
Yeah,
you know,
as I said, I came out of East Wind Ensemble.
So
I said, "Oh God, this
I
band
appreciate it
isn't
more.
very good." You know.
Yeah.
And Howard is, oh my God.
So we had it's interesting.
So I was kind of snotty too.
A quick comment. I grew up in the DC area. And blessed by having middle school and high school directors that had come out of the service band systems. But what I remember the most is getting up in the morning and turning on WMAL, and they do the March of the Day. And usually it was the Air Force Band because they loved Colonel Gabriel. And it was a wonderful place to learn how to play a musical instrument because of all the great service bands and the concerts. And you could see a great service band just about every night of the week.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a funny story. After 9/11, the country music station in DC, I forget the call letters, started playing the national anthem at noon every day, and they used military band recordings. Now the one that we played was the one that Yari arranged, which the middle section isn't la 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 la. No, it's bum 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 bum. French horns are playing. It's a really good arrangement. But I used to love to hear the Coast Guard because, oh, say does that star-spangled by the end, it's like, oh God, come on. It was funny, but they stopped doing that a while ago, obviously. So.
Okay, other questions, comments? We have time. Nothing? Okay, gentlemen.
No more comic jokes.
I have a question.
Yeah,
Sure.
sure.
Uh,
Art.
When did they start using bagpipes, and when did that tradition leave the Air Force Band?
It left before I was in. Now, there are still bagpipes down at Warner Robins Air Force Base. They're attached to that unit. And I think they have brought one back now to DC, or a couple guys, but I'm not sure of that, but I think they have.
Okay, now, what years were you in?
82 to 2003.
Because the first time that I ever heard the Air Force Band, I had the privilege of being a U.S. Capitol page boy
Okay.
many years ago, and back in 1968, I used to go to departmental auditorium where the Air Force Band was playing concerts. And it's the first time I heard the Air Force Band, and Colonel Gabriel was conducting. They played Overture to Candide, I can remember that very well. But they did something with bagpipes. And I was just curious how that bagpipe tradition.
You know, I've never understood that. We see that a lot, and especially at Arlington. There's one guy, he's out as a bagpiper there almost every day, gets hired. I think, and some people said the same thing, it stems all the way back from the old days, Boston and New York. The police and the firemen were so heavily Irish and Scottish immigrants and they brought bagpipes with, and that became associated with their parades.
Right.
And it kind of filtered its way to the military. Is that true or not? I don't know, but it sounds reasonable.
Yeah.
And let me tell you something, you haven't lived until you've heard the Pakistani Army Bagpipe Band.
Yeah.
They are terrific. I didn't know you could play bagpipes in tune.
They
do.
But I didn't know if they were actually members of the band or
Well,
if they were attached to.
The ones they have now, like I said, they're based down at Warner Robins in Georgia.
Yeah.
And they're based with them, and they're full-time Air Force band members,
Right,
just like we are.
okay. I just was curious about that.
Mhm.
I think you, yeah.
What's the story with cellos in the Air Force Band?
Yeah, that's one of the oddities of the Air Force Band is they have cellos. Because, well, remember, they had a string group, and I don't know why they had cellos. They
Gabriel.
were there when I got there.
That was Gabriel added them.
Well, no, they were in when
Were
I,
they when he-
oh, they
I
were in
wrote
with
it down.
Howard, yeah. 'Cause
But
I
I know
remember
they still do it.
Zukovsky was the head cellist.
I don't know why.
I don't know
That's-
why.
They had big cases.
Hmm?
They had big cases.
Big cases,
Oh,
actually.
well, no, but the band wasn't traveling to Barbados. No, I don't know. Do they still have the cellos?
I believe so.
I think
Last
they're
time
still
thought
in.
they did.
Well, a lot of them.
They did not.
Oh,
have
they
them.
didn't? Okay, well, but the trouble is then all the arrangements that Floyd Worley made
Mhm.
had cello
I was
parts.
blaming you for it.
In fact, I wrote several arrangements and I had to put cello parts in. So, yeah, so does that answer?
Well-
We really don't know.
I heard that it was something that was put in by Colonel Howard,
Yeah,
who, by the way, after he left the Air Force, got up to Penn State and had an equally bad reputation too.
oh, he went to, oh, I thought after Washington, he went right to retirement in San Antonio, but he went to Pennsylvania? Okay,
For a while.
yeah, well, he was, yeah.
So do your trumpet players want a non-military story that'll make you sick?
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
I used to live
He's
in,
got a hand too, from the
you
back.
used to live in Frederick, Maryland, and the Frederick News Post every Friday would have a list of things that were being auctioned the next day at the auction. I'm looking at it one night and I see silver New York trumpet. What could that be? I said to my wife, I'm going down to look at it. I go down that afternoon. I walk in, I see this case, see the horn. Here it's a Bach, serial number 154, built in 1929, the first year they were in existence, possibly built by Bach himself.
Yeah.
So you're not allowed to touch the stuff, so I didn't know if it played or not. I go home to the wife, I said, I'm going tomorrow, I don't care what that goes for, I'm buying that horn. And she says, I married her for this reason, she says, okay. I go down the next day, here comes the horn up for auction, they start at $100, my hand goes up, another guy's hand goes up. 150, 200, 250, he drops his hand. I walk away with $140 for this horn. Get it home, clean it. It's a large bore, which is odd.
Yeah, it's a symphonic.
Plays
trumpet.
great.
Yeah.
The horn plays terrific. So I'm thinking, okay, now what do I do with this thing? Okay, I'm a Yamaha trumpet artist. I can't play it in public. Just gonna sit around the house as something nice, or am I gonna make some coin? So I held on to it for a while, and a few years later, I contacted Mike Caldwell, who's the principal of Cleveland Symphony, who's a Bach artist. I sent him just an email, and I said, I own Bach number 154. Are you interested? He replies in caps, am I? So I sold it for $3,800. And I said to my wife, I wonder how many other trumpet players are reading the Frederick News Post every Friday now to see if any trumpets are showing up. So that's just make the trumpet players sick.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Question,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wendy?
And the last hand back there too.
Oh, sorry.
No,
You have a question?
ladies first.
I'm sorry, I
Okay.
didn't see. Do either one of you know anything, this would probably be mid-20th century history, about Henry Goss being an arranger for the Air Force Band?
I know the name, but I couldn't tell you much else.
Oh,
Wasn't there one?
I've always heard that as part of his biography. and
I've heard the name. That's the most I can say. That I've heard the name, but I don't know under what.
Sir, you've been very patient, yes.
Well,
Two comments. First of all, Spanish bands use cellos.
What?
Spanish
Spanish
bands
bands.
use cellos.
Spanish bands.
Spanish bands had cellos? Okay,
It's
well,
quite a sound.
well, I've learned something new today.
Walk in and see this full band, complete band, 7 young women on cello and 3 double basses. And what, talk about a silky sound? You say, is that a band? Well, all right, I'll leave it up to you. Is it a band? The other comment was that, to Art, I had a bagpiper in my National Guard band. because the 69th Regiment, the Fighting Irish, was
Mhm.
part of our division.
Okay.
So we had a backpacker right in the band.
Well, the only thing I ever heard was that Howard hated saxophones, and they didn't have very many saxophones when I got there. Wow.
So,
We have time for one more question.
or not.
Okay, if not, thank you very much, gentlemen, that was great.